Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Women in Math and STEM, where our mission is to reach out to as many professionals, aspiring professionals, students, whatever you name it. We try to reach out to them, who essentially support the initiative of bringing more women and young girls into the STEM field. So, with that being said, as always, feel free to open up the description or transcript to better follow along, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hello, and thank you so much for coming to this call and talking with me. Just to sort of start off, could you briefly introduce yourself as well as walk us through your journey, whether it be like your personal journey, your academic journey, sort of like how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, awesome. I'm super happy to be here. So my name is Dr. Robyn Brooks. I am currently a postdoctoral fellow with the Science Research Initiative at the University of Utah. Before this, I was a visiting professor at Boston College, and before that, I was a grad student, and I am a mathematician. So journey, that is a great question. Let me try to go through it as sensibly as I can. Um, so I was always super interested in math. Even as a kid in grade school, like I had my mom give me extra math problems and I did as much math homework as I could. I was also really lucky. Both my parents are accounting professors. So I got to kind of see how cool it is to be a teacher. So when I was going like through high school and in college, I always kind of knew that I was going to major in math, and I had this goal of becoming a math professor so I could kind of be like my parents and be as cool as them. So when I was in college, I already knew what major I wanted to do, took a million math classes, loved it. And when I got through to my last year of college, I decided to not immediately apply to graduate schools like some people do. I decided to take a little break because at that point I was a little bit burnt out, 20 years of schooling or how many, 16 years of schooling is a lot. And so I decided I wanted to take a year off and study for the math GREs. It's a test that you take when you apply to math graduate schools. And just kind of like hang out. I waited some tables. I worked as a seamstress for a little bit. Um, and when I was going to apply for colleges in my gap year, I was like, oh, I'm only going to apply to like the top 10 universities in the country. Um, and so I did, and I did that before I got my math GRE scores back. And when I did get my math GRE scores back, I was in the, I think, 18th percentile. So that means that out of all the people taking the test, 82% did better than I did, and 18% did worse. So it's a very low score. Um, and didn't get into any of those grad schools that I applied for, which was kind of a bummer because I was really looking forward to going to grad school. My parents kind of convinced me that, hey, why don't you think about doing instead of doing a PhD in math, why not do one in finance? They were both business professors, and like finance is basically math. You can go do math there. And so I did apply to some finance grad schools and I got in. So I started doing grad school to get a PhD in finance. It didn't really work out for me. I knew kind of right away that it wasn't what I really wanted to like devote my life to. People tell you if you're like going to go get a PhD, it's at least 5 years and you have to really love what you're doing. So if you don't, it's really hard to get through that program and you probably shouldn't do it anyways. So I stayed for 2 years. I got a master's in finance and then I took some more time off. I again worked as a seamstress. So my other love other than math is sewing. So I worked as a seamstress for a while and I really loved it. But I couldn't kind of get out of my head that I wanted to pursue mathematics as my career. So I tried again applying to grad schools, and this time I decided to apply to grad schools that weren't just top grad schools. I was going to apply to places where I thought that I would be happy living in the city where that grad school was. So I ended up going to Tulane University in New Orleans, and I was quite happy there. And I did my graduate studies there. Um, I graduated in 2020, the summer of 2020, which we all know is not the best time to graduate for us who had to graduate in 2020. But I was lucky enough to get a job. I moved to Boston for 3 years and I worked at Boston College. And then I got another position here at the University of Utah, which I was also very happy about because I grew up in Salt Lake City. And so I was able to come back home and be around my family. It's also a really fun job that I have now. I'm mostly focused on leading undergraduate research in mathematics. So I get to work with students and do research with them.
I think you mentioned that both your parents were accounting professors, but you decided to pursue something math related. Did you have any expectations sort of going into college that you were surprised about, or like expectations that were fulfilled about being a math major?
Yeah, I think so. Having two professor parents, I think, was a huge privilege for me, in that I think I understood the university system pretty well coming in. I was also really lucky in particular to have like a very strong mother who basically, if I ran into a problem with the university, I was like, oh, they say I don't have the prerequisites to take this class, but I really want to take it. It sounds so interesting. She had kind of insider knowledge that, like, hey, go talk to the professor and see if you can get in anyways. And so I would do that and I would get in. So I think having that kind of insider knowledge of like what is acceptable at universities and having the confidence that she kind of gave me to like make my own path and maybe not take other people's advice as certainty, and her being like, no, 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 that's not a good idea. You do what you want, was something that was really great.
I think you also mentioned that you took like a bajillion classes in college. Did you have like your favorite math classes?
Yeah, so I think I all of them. Um, One class that I took when my first year of college was something that was called Introduction to Proofreading. So in high school, you'll take like calculus and statistics and maybe geometry. And I think a lot of people are really surprised to learn that math isn't just equations or numbers. There's a lot of different things that you can do with math. Um, you can write proofs, you can, draw shapes, you can count things, you can do statistics, different things like that. And this introduction to proofs class is trying to teach you that math isn't just writing down an equation and solving it. It's really, using logic and critical problem solving to kind of fully understand a problem. Um, and that class just kind of blew my mind a little bit. I think the first thing that you do is you have this proof that the square root of 2 is an irrational number, meaning it can't be written as a fraction. And that's something that I don't think anyone's going to disagree with you about. They can't write square root of 2 as a fraction, but really proving that and writing down why that can't happen is not too difficult. And it's a really beautiful proof that shows that you can prove some really strong things without, doing a derivative or calculating a long division or something like that. So that class was pretty mind-blowing to me.
And then what would you say are some of the biggest differences between being like a math student versus like a math educator or like somebody who like works with students?
Yeah, I think unfortunately there are more differences than there should be because I'm a mathematician, but unless you're a mathematician that works for like a national lab doing research, you're always going to have to be teaching, right? So I teach undergraduates and I will always teach undergraduates. And I really love that. And most mathematicians do, but we don't get a ton of training on how best to teach mathematical ideas. So I think the biggest difference between maybe going to school for like just math itself and math education is when you do a math education major, you're just focused on learning the actual math itself. You spend a lot of time thinking about the different ways that you could arrive at an answer. And you spend a lot of time learning how to explain your thoughts to people who might think differently than you, which is not necessarily something that you're going to learn when you are just taking a bunch of math classes. The reason I say it's unfortunate is because when you do actual mathematics, you're almost never doing that isolated and alone, which means you're going to have to talk to people. And it's really great to learn how to say the same thing in different ways. It makes you a better mathematician. It helps you understand the concepts that you're talking about a little bit better. But sometimes just math classes won't have you practice that because there's so much emphasis on like the content itself as opposed to the way that we communicate with each other or the different ways that we think about problems.
And then I was just curious what your favorite part about working with undergraduate students in research and both like just in math in general was.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I have a lot of different favorite things. I love that you guys teach me new slang. That's my favorite thing. I learn about a lot of good new music that way too. Um, I think that one of my favorite things about interacting with undergrads and teaching and doing research is kind of what I was talking about in the last question, this idea of approaching problems differently. When you're working on something alone, especially mathematics, um, you can get really locked into an idea that things have to be a certain way, right? You have the right way of thinking about this problem. It's got to be this way, and that's the only way to answer it. And that's never true. Oh, this is my cat. She wants to
Hi,
join.
she's so cute. Oh my God.
She's pretty cute. Her name is Mu in honor of Mu, the Greek letter. Her brother is Tau. We'll see if he joins us. Um, so yeah, so there's never really one right way of seeing things. And so when you're working with undergraduates, oftentimes you're working with people who are learning concepts for the first time, and they can make, oh, jeez, they can make a lot of, sorry about that. Undergraduates, like they bring a new way of thinking to different problems. So one of my favorite things about teaching is writing like a homework problem or a test problem where I'm like, okay, this is how most people are probably going to solve this. And I'm like, I wrote this derivative problem and they are going to do the problem. They're going to practice these derivative rules. And I'll have one student who thinks of a totally innovative, easier way to do that problem, and it just completely blows my mind, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I never once thought of it that way, but that is a wonderful way and a better way of solving this problem than I ever thought of. So I guess just students being able to kind of display that like there's an infinite way of approaching all different types of problems, and the more that you interact with people, the more that you kind of like see that diversity, and it's really beautiful.
And I think you mentioned before you also enjoyed like do like sewing or like being a seamstress. I was just wondering how you sort of
Yep.
balance like such a intensive like career in math and like your interests that you want to do like on the side.
Yeah, so I actually think it's almost a necessity to have something else that you're really passionate about. Um, you can do math all day long, but if you do that for years and years and years, it's going to drive you a little bit nuts. And a lot of times when you're doing, when you're doing research or when you're doing, even with teaching, you work 8 hours on a problem and you can't really see a clear way through. It's really wonderful to be able to like switch your brain to something else. Like so, I make quilts for my friends. And so I'll think about the different, what pattern do I want to do? How do I need to, what size do the shapes need to be to make this certain size? And then working on the actual quilt itself. It's just like a totally different thing that I'm really immersed in. It kind of takes my mind away from that original problem. And then when I go back to it the next day, I feel refreshed and I have like kind of more ability to think in new ways. It can be hard, right? Because sometimes you feel like if you haven't solved a problem, you need to keep working until you solve it. So you kind of have to learn to be patient with yourself and actually understand that like just spending time and thinking is not always the answer. Sometimes you need to give yourself a little bit of a break, and that's actually really helpful.
And then sort of on the same note, do you have any pieces of advice, recommendations, suggestions, like anything for young students, but particularly young women who are interested in studying math in the future?
Yeah, so I read this question and I've been thinking about it. There's a lot out there. Um, there's a lot of barriers that face everyone when they're doing math, but like in particular, women in doing math. One way that I think, uh, one thing that I think people can do to make the journey a little bit easier is to try to build community, a supportive community around them, or find a supportive community. A lot of times in disciplines like mathematics, where there are very low numbers of women and other minorities, it can be really hard to see yourself as a mathematician, and you can kind of feel isolated. You can feel, you can have the imposter syndrome, right? Um, so finding supportive peers, finding supportive teachers, finding mentors of all different types can really, really help, because they can kind of give you the energy to keep going, and they can also help combat maybe some like imposter syndrome or like isolation, those feelings of loneliness. And so what you're doing, right? You start a math club in your high school, and maybe not every single person at the high school is going to join it, but like you build that little community, and then you look for other places for community as well. And once you kind of start the ball rolling, I think there are also a lot of people in mathematics and mathematic adjacent professions, teachers, things like that, who want to help you build community and want to help you be successful. So I guess the second thing is like, don't be afraid to ask for help, whether that's finding a mentor or struggling with your classes, or trying to find a place to apply for college. Always reach out for help. There are people that have tons of information, and like they want to help you. So don't see asking for help as a sign of weakness. It is absolutely not in any way.
Okay, thank you so much for coming to this call and sharing your experience with me. It was absolutely phenomenal. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you. Thank you so much.